Okay, thanks. Good morning, everybody. So today I'm going to present you some of our recent studies that we published using YouTube to characterize ecological and social recreational fisheries in Italy, which is my own country. So as you can see throughout my studies, we are comparing two groups of recreational fishers that are using YouTube, spearfishers and anglers. And as you can see, there are two different kind of typology of videos, and I will show you that these kind of videos will also trigger different social reactions. So the talk will be structured according, I will give you some information about what kind of information we can get from YouTube, and then I will present 3 case studies, one on an iconic species, a snapper, another one on groupers, and then on an invasive species. And then I will give you some suggestions about ethical and privacy issues that we found using this kind of data. So YouTube, why? Yeah, it's the second most visited website in the world. A lot of information is uploaded every minute, so it's translated in several languages in several countries. So it's a very nice platform if you want to get preliminary information on recreational fisheries, but also have specific questions to compare groups within the same social media. And most importantly, opens windows to understand the social and the human dimension of recreational fisheries, because this is defined technically as a participatory dynamic cultural system. So as Ingrid was saying yesterday, culture is important, and when we can quantitatively assess some cultural perspective of recreational fisheries on YouTube. So many recreational fishers are using it. A photo or a video, as you can see, have so much information into that. It can be ecological information, the time in which the video or the photo is uploaded. But most importantly, we can get into the human dimension. So the social engagement that the video is triggering, but also the comments and the text of the comments that recreational fisheries are exchanges on YouTube. And then we can ask social ecological questions. So just to give you some information about the methodology, we are not taking the information out of the video, but from the metadata. It means that what we are using is the title, description of the video, or the text of the comments, not the content of the video. And then in doing this, we are using R, which can interface with the application program interface on YouTube, and downloading this data. So the first example, which is the common dentex, iconic species for many recreational fishes and commercial fishes as well. The first thing that we demonstrate is that we can track the temporal patterns of recreational fishing by looking at the upload time of the videos. So the times here is when the video has been uploaded. As you can see, there are arrows, but they are not appearing now. So the spearfishing videos are peaking in summer, in July, August. What does it mean? These species perform a seasonal bathymetric migration and can be available to spearfishers, which are depth limited in Italy because they can only fish in free dive. They can only fish these species during the summer months. And as you can see, the upload is a proxy of the catchability of these species for spearfishers, something that we are not seeing for angling, which can access the species at every time of the year. Then we discovered that many recreational fishers were sharing the mass of the fish up to the gram, so they were weighing it, and we compared these two groups. And we found that according to previous results, the expectation was the opposite, that spearfishers were catching the larger fish because they can select visually on the fish, but we discovered the opposite. And this is what is happening is that most recently, anglers discovered some new techniques, in particular with cameras and living baits, and they are more effective in the size selectivity of these fish. The arrows appear now. So we can understand the fishery ecology, the seasonal bathymetric migration of these species, and how it affects catchability, but also the size selectivity of these two groups on the species. And then if you look at the social engagement, so number of views, number of comments, and number of likes of these videos, and compare the two groups, you can see that spearfishers are more engaged. At the beginning, we were thinking about this is just a property of this group of spearfishers, but in reality, if you look at other species, you can see the opposite pattern. So this is a species-specific response, which gives you information about the interest of these groups in the species. So other species, anglers are more engaged. And then what is interesting is that when you combine this information with the mass, for example, I think this is one of the most interesting results that we discovered, is that the mass is predicting the number of views of the videos for spearfishers. So the bigger is the fish, the higher is the social engagement, but it's not happening with anglers. So we have some hypotheses about that, but I will not get into that. But I think it's a nice way to have a measurement of a social ecological feedback in recreational fisheries. This is the second example. So groupers, we mine data for several species, and we ask questions that were not related to recreational fisheries, so a sort of passive citizen science. And what we discovered is that dusky grouper, emblematic species for conservation and for recreational fisheries, we discovered this, what is called an ontogenetic pattern. Ontogenetic deepening means that the larger groupers are more oftenly caught by spearfishers in deeper water. And this is a nice example to test the response of the fish to the pressure of spearfishers, but also this kind of pattern can be modified by climate change. And even if this is a well-studied species in the Mediterranean Sea, there are not so many quantifications of this kind of ontogenetic deepening for these species. So another way in which we can use this kind of data. Then I think the species that gave us the most interesting results, it's the white grouper. So it's a species that is performing a distribution range shift right now. So was quite common in the south of Italy, was not at all present in the north part of Italy, and now is moving up there. And what we discovered looking at the time of upload of the video, that is the latitude is increasing over the last few years. Now we are continuing with these studies, and we also are applying other kind of analysis that I can show you later, maybe, not now. And then this is another species that we studied. So if you look at the monitoring program of recreational fisheries in Italy, Spain, or France, this species never appears. It's the dog-tooth grouper. I don't know if you have this species here. It's a huge one, can reach 50 kilos, and it's a keystone species for deep sea ecosystem. It lives in deep sea mountains, and usually there are 1 or 2 individuals for a huge areas. And what's happening is that there is a specialized group of anglers that are tackling these species. As you can see, the catches from YouTube are between 100 and 400 meters. So you need to be very specialized for catching these huge fish. You need to go there, a lot of equipment, a lot of echo sounding, electric reels, and these kind of things. And so we were able to understand that there is this group fishing these species, and removing this huge predator, probably an apex predator for this ecosystem, could be quite a shock, triggering cascading effects. Then the third part of the talk is about the human dimension, social aspects, and in particular what we did is downloading comments, clean the text of the comments, and apply a sentiment analysis. So a sentiment analysis, what does is associating a specific emotions to a specific word. So if I say something like this, I'm happy to be here, this is my first time in Australia, and I'm excited and enjoying the conference, what I score is 4 in joy, 1 in trust, and 1 in anticipation. Okay? So there are 8 basic emotions. If on one side you have joy, on the other one you have sadness. On the contrary, if I say something like this about the war that is going on, I score 2 in fear, 1 in disgust, and 1 in sadness. So what we can do is apply this kind of analysis to the comments on YouTube and then compare the 2 groups, recreational spearfishers and anglers. And this is what we did for this species, Pomatomus saltatrix. I think you have this species in Australia. It's a cosmopolitan species. So if you go in Turkey, it's called the Prince of Bosphorus. So a strong culture about this species. But then if you go in Italy, this is an invasive species. So it was a little bit common in the south of Italy, and now it's again shifting the distribution due to climate change. and is increasing in abundance, and in some places is negatively perceived as an invasive species. So what we did is downloading data from YouTube, downloading the comments of mostly 400 videos. We were able to download 9,000 comments, clean the text, compare the vocabulary of the two groups, recreational spearfishers and anglers. As you can see, there are some peculiarity in the way in which they are communicating and using specific words, which is interesting. Some are respected, others no. And then we applied the sentiment analysis. So the strong thing here is that with few hundreds of videos, you were able to score 35,000 comments and sentiments on these comments. And this is what we discovered. So if you look at the 8 basic emotions, you will see that spearfishers are mostly more positive in trust, surprise, joy than anglers, while anglers are more negative in sadness, fear, and disgust, and anger. So why that? So we also applied a content analysis, which means that we put these comments in context, what they are speaking about. And what they are speaking about, I don't know if you can guess. They are attacking each other about a specific topic, which is catch and release. It's the way in which they are handling the fish out of the water, releasing the fish, or doing something related to catch and release. That was the main topic of discussion in which negative sentiments are arising in angling. While in spearfishes it is more about the athletic performance in the video, going deeper, the way in which they were moving out in the water, and more into the physical component of the fishing action. So then what we did, we knew that there was this controversy about the invasiveness of the species. We selected in the comments specific keywords like invasiveness, infestation, plague, predatory behavior, to understand if there were contrasting emotions regarding these traits. So we were expecting negative perception about the invasiveness of the species, but also positive reaction with respect to the predatory and aggressiveness of the species, which is very nice to catch by anglers. And then this is what we discovered. In both groups, anglers and spearfishers, there are both positive and negative comments. So if some of them are saying this is an invasive species, sooner or later our fish will be a memory, but others within the same group, I'm really enjoying catching this fish, it's a cruel fish, what a predator, what jaws. And so I think this kind of information is quite important because we can quantitatively measure the response to an invasive species within both groups and understand what are the traits that are triggering these kind of emotions in these species. So we are, as we explained yesterday in the workshop, I don't know if some of you were there, we are operationalizing this approach and calibrating the system. In particular, we are asking what are the proportion of recreational fishers that are sharing their catches on YouTube. And what we have found is that the penetration of using YouTube is between 12 and 25%, so it's not so high. But we were able to have a profile of recreational fishers that are sharing their catches. And these are more avid, spend more money on fishing trips, so are more specialized probably, have a higher harvest per unit of effort, and also greater chances to catch a trophy species. It's quite dense paper, so you can have a look at all the results. And I think this is the most important message from a management and usage of this approach in monitoring recreational fisheries. There are several papers about that. And the take-home message is that data are public, so we can download them, we can use them, but we need to respond to the ethical principle of human subject research, and most importantly, to people reasonable expectation of privacy, which is what is written into YouTube in terms of usage of this platform. So data are public, but we cannot reveal, if I'm using your video from YouTube, I cannot reveal your identity because it's not a citizen science. You didn't give me the approval to me to use this kind of data. It's a passive mining. The recreational fishers are not aware we are using this data, so we need to respect their reasonable expectation of privacy. And I think this is quite important for avoiding legal issues in using this data. And I'm done, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerio. Perfectly timed. We'll have questions at the end there, so make sure you've got some, jot them down, and we'll have a little bit of a panel chat afterwards. Just click through to the next slide, can you? Our next speaker is Marco Signaroli. We've got a bit of a theme going on here. I assume you're an Italian who's also working in Spain, so
Exactly.
you're a PhD student in the lovely Balearic Islands, Mallorca.
Yes.
Based, and we're going to hear a talk a bit about deep learning. So click on your name, can you, just for the mouse? Just bring the cursor here.
Where?
That's right.
Okay. Hello everybody, I'm Marco. I'm doing my PhD in Mallorca at the Mediterranean Institute for Advanced Studies. And that's what I'm doing. I'm developing a system to quantify and qualify recreational fisheries, fishing effort using deep learning. Basically, I'm training algorithms to track fishing boat movements in coastal areas. I think we all know which is one problem that we have with recreational fishing, and is that there is no regulation regarding equation systems for the fleet compared to the professional fishing. Now we are collecting data mainly using portable devices, citizen science, and surveys. But the main problem of these methods is that they rely almost totally on fishers. So, thanks to the recent advance in the image technology, and especially of artificial intelligence, now we are able to easily collect and analyze recreational fishing data, taking more objective data that we can combine with the other methods to calibrate them and to obtain more precise results. So the objective of this study is the development of an automatic and real-time tool to track fishing boat movements from time lapses in coastal areas. So this work is mainly developing a software that is composed by two parts. The first part is an object detector, and we started using this neural network, this algorithm, YOLO5, that finds the location of fishing boats in an image. The second part is the tracker, deep sort. The tracker combines all the position of the fishing boats in subsequent images, reconstructing their trajectories. This work is all about choosing, optimizing, and comparing algorithms and their parameters to choose the best combination possible. Then, with the software ready, we will deploy it in an hardware. This is a Jetson Nano for real-time analysis. But also we are going to use it to analyze our stored data. This is our case study. This is the species that we are focusing on, the pearly razorfish. That is a small labrid living in the sandy bottoms. And this is our playground, the partial marine protected area of Palma Bay. And this is what happened when, at the beginning of September, the fishing season opens. What happened is that suddenly in the first weekends of September, we found hundreds of boats fishing all together. So this is a perfect occasion for us to develop and test our system. I will be very fast on the technical and boring part. This is the first part of the software, the object detector. For those who are not familiar with artificial intelligence and deep learning, a deep learning algorithm, also called a neural network, is just an algorithm that is able automatically to learn how to perform a task only looking at some given example. So the first thing we did was to collect a huge data set of photos. We collected more than 250,000 photos, mainly of Palma Bay. And from this data set, we sampled 300 photos and we labeled them. It means that we draw manually around every boat bounding boxes that are these rectangles to use this example to teach to the neural network how to find boats in images. And we classify them into categories, motorboats and sailing boats. This was for start from the beginning to clean our data set because sailing boats are not usually fishing. So we are focusing on fishing boats. With this data set, we optimized, using a genetic algorithm, all the parameters of the neural networks. And then finally, we trained a lot of models, and we test them to assess their performance on another test data set composed by 65 photos. The second part is the tracker. The workflow is similar. We made a custom validation dataset labeling another time photos of moving boats. This time we label not sparse photos, but time lapses, 3 time lapses of 100 photos each. And we use this dataset to optimize another time the parameters of the algorithm to obtain the best combination possible. This tracking algorithm is cool, also mainly because it contains also a neural network, a trainable part. So we tried also to train it because the original one was trained with pedestrians. So we tried to fine tune it, but we found no big relevant differences between the trained and with the boats and with the pedestrians. So I will skip this part. These are the results. We reached the mean average precision of more than 0.8. These numbers are relatives. I mean, we are using them only to compare algorithm and their functioning. The real result is this one. This is an output example. We see that the algorithm is able to find every boat and also to classify them between sailing boat and motorboat. And this is the final result of the tracking algorithm with the best object detector we trained. And we can see that it works pretty well. I think this is a really cool system to catch all the fishes. Well, there are some problems. For example, waves detected boats or missing detection when boats are moving fast. But we are still working on it. So the next step will be to compare other algorithms and with other parameters to another time choose the best combination possible. For the object detector, we're going to use the next versions of YOLO 5, YOLO 7, 8. Also, we are going to compare other trackers. And then with the final software ready, the idea is to deploy it in a Jetson Nano, placed along the coast, focusing, looking at the sea, protected by a housing system, equipped with a high-definition camera, solar panels, and internet connection to control it remotely. This was, talking about the hardware, our first prototype that we used to collect the data set. It was just a camera, a reflex, looking at the bay. And this is the second version of the prototype where we start using single-board computers to take photos and to analyze them. This is a Raspberry Pi. We discovered that the Raspberry Pi is not enough powerful to analyze images using deep learning, so we're going to change it with a Jetson Nano. But the cool things about using computers is that they are totally customizable. So, for example, we programmed a Telegram bot to control it, to send easy, simple commands to the running program. And this is our goal, is to obtain this kind of data. For example, that are highly detailed in space and time. So we have the distribution maps of the fishing boats over long periods of time, distribution maps in certain specific moments of the day. These cross are the location of the fishing boats, and the green area is the surface covered by the seagrass Posidonia oceanica, and also in time. So this is an estimation of the fishing effort. This is during almost a month, and this is during 6 hours. So pretty detailed data. Of course, the work does not finish with the obtained trajectories. We have two main problems to solve. The first one is that how to eliminate from our analysis the photos that are not fishing, the boats that are not fishing. So, as I said before, we can do it classifying directly them, but it's really difficult because we see the boats from far distance. So we think that the best way to do it is working directly on the calculated trajectories of the fishing boats. Every fisher, like the fishers, like every predator, have their foraging behavior. So clustering and classifying the trajectory, we can eliminate the boats that are not fishing, for example, or using the same system but placed in other places from a close distance, for example, in the port exits, to classify the boats and to calculate how many boats are going out of the port to go fishing. And then, of course, this system does not give us directly the fishing effort. We are only tracking, we are only counting boats. So we don't know how many catches every boat does. So that's why we need other data sources to combine to reach a good estimation of the fishing effort using citizen science or models. And these are some improvements that we can do with this system, like we can combine multiple cameras to get stereo imaging data, or you can use infrared cameras to see the boats also when they are not so visible, or for example during the night. So to conclude, this system is pretty good because it's mainly automatic, continuous, and it works in real time. And in my opinion, it's really cool because it can give us high resolution and complex data. It's modular, easy to deploy, and it also may serve for other purposes, like for marine protected area surveillance. The problem with this system is that it's case dependent. I mean that especially the post-processing, the disentangling of the trajectories, it depends on the marine traffic of the area. So you have to adapt it to the case. And also, it's not the final method to quantify and qualify the fishing recreational effort because we need other sources of data. And of course, this method is limited to coastal areas and limited to boat fishing. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thanks, Marco. We've got a couple of minutes. Does anyone have any questions for Marco? Yeah.
Marco, great talk, mate. You said it's limited to coastal areas. I'm guessing you've answered this many times already, but satellite imagery, aerial imagery, you have it up there.
Yeah.
Does the algorithm work on that?
Yeah, you have to readapt it. You have to train it more using the other type of images. Okay. When I said that this is limited to coastal areas, I was speaking about the system itself, not only the neural network. We can use the neural network. We can train more using the same neural network already trained. We can fine-tune them with satellite images, and they are able also to identify boats from that kind of images. But you have to readapt them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Test case scenario, and then you have to go.
More or less, from our point of view, that we took photos from a cliff, 100-meter high. So they are not so different, the boats, from that point of view, compared to boats seen from a satellite. Yeah. It's just a white spot in the sea. Yeah. So yeah, you have to adapt them.
Hi, Marco. How far are we away from being able to detect a boat going down on a ramp and pick up that same boat coming back? So we estimate about hours, maybe shoot or something like that.
That's really difficult. That's the main problem about object tracking. The main problem is to re-identify in subsequent images the same boat. And this is difficult with a high frame rate. Our time lapses are made of photos taken every 2 seconds. Okay, so, and this is difficult. Imagine after a few hours. And you need a lot of resolution, and you need a really big data set. But yes, we are going there.
We were just about to start. Sorry. So in must have something on me that's making that.
Great. So we're about to start a pilot study in Queensland piloting machine vision cameras at boat ramps as well as number plate recognition cameras. So the machine vision cameras, they can count how many launches and retrieves happen at the boat ramp. They won't know exactly what boat that was, like how long it's been out. But if you pair it with the number plate recognition cameras, you will know that the boat with Yeah, so the company that are doing it called Hyperion, and they're trying to train it at the moment to be able to count, to identify the registration on the boat. It's a bit trickier than on a number plate because obviously boats can have, the format of the numbers is not always exactly the same, but they are trying to do that. So
We might
just get going.
great. We'll continue through in that discussion afterwards. Marco, thanks, Marco.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. Great talk. A bit closer to home, we're going up to lovely sunny Queensland, New South Wales.
Close enough.
So Gavin Butler is a senior research scientist with New South Wales Fisheries and is going to be talking to us about bass tournaments.
So how do I make this thing? Okay, cool. So yeah, yep.
Use that.
This one.
Cool.
I just wasted a minute. Anyway, that's the way it goes. So yes, continuing the international theme. Yes, I am from New South Wales, so it's very close to Spain and Italy. Okay, so what I want to talk about, I want to actually say before I start, this program's been running for 30 years. There's probably about a list, should be about another 700 people on the bottom of this, and there's a whole bunch of anglers that I didn't think of. So anybody that's in the room that helped out with bass capture over the years, and your name's not up there, I would apologise. I'd also like to thank Direct Trust because they've supported this project for a long time. So when we talk about Australian freshwater angling species, these are probably two of the ones that always come to mind. And we really have a whole bunch that are really sort of like, I guess you call them second cousins, but they're also really important to our fisheries, and they're really important fisheries for recreational anglers. So probably one of my favourites, and it's a bit local to us, and up in northern New South Wales, is Australian bass. It's not as big as the other one, it doesn't grow quite as big, it's a medium-sized fish, but it does get up around 600 mils, and pound for pound it can outpull a barramundi any day of the week. They're long-lived, they're semi-catadromous, what I mean by that, they migrate down every year, so they go, the females go right up into the fresh water, and they come down the estuary, so the migrations can be 300 kilometres. So they're quite a cool fish, and they live for a long time, so throughout their life, you can do the math, so if they're sexually mature at 5 years, they could migrate 15 to plus times throughout their life. Distribution, this is where the problem really sort of starts for us, because it's so widely distributed across so many different estuaries and freshwater environments that are really hard to monitor. So it's about 2,000 kilometres of coastline, about 1,500 in New South Wales alone. So it's got regulations that control the fishery, and one of the primary ways that we all help, or supposedly help this fishery, and what we wanted to look at was actually through stocking. So stocking in New South Wales is massive, like most of the world. Those big, massive fish there are all the places that have been stocked in New South Wales, not for bass, but for all sorts of fish. So it's not one of our main stocking species, but still in 2023 we stocked about 360,000 in impoundments and rivers. Mainly in impoundments because this fish is catadromous, so if you don't stock impoundments they disappear, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the big challenge for us is how do we monitor this fish? So we have this program called Bass Catch. It's been running for now 35 years. It's fluctuated throughout its time, but it's basically anglers going out and organised tournaments and us helping them out, I suppose, in a way, by helping them get data, sheets and so forth, and giving prizes, and then them actually sending the data. So some of these places have been running this program or doing this every year for about 30 years. So it's a really powerful data set. So they collect things like catch, length, hours fished, and they also do a little avidity survey. We won't be talking about it today. So what we wanted to do was actually, it sat basically on a database for nearly 30 years, and no one did anything with it. And they're going, what are we collecting this data for? So we thought, well, we'd try and drag it out. So I was lucky enough to work with some really smart people, and a smart person named Dan Gwynn, and he's really great at manipulating data. So this is his stuff. So when we get to the modelling stuff, if I start fumbling, it's because he's the modeller, not me. I'm a model, just a model. So we collected, or we got a subset of the data from 1998 through to 2015, so you can do the maths there. It's about 27 years of data. So across that time, there was 82,000 plus bass and 311 events that were included in our analysis. We also pulled other relevant data in, so numbers stock, to see if we could see if there was an effect of that. and also other factors like river discharges as a pseudo measure for like potential migration. So what we're saying here, you get flow, the fish migrate. So I had up there before that they're environmentally limited, so if we don't get flow, they tend to stay up and we don't migrate every year. So this is what we set out to do, to look at the spatial and temporal trends in things like mean length, maximum length and relative abundance using this catch data. We didn't know how we'd go. Dan was very pessimistic about it, and then we started to really get some really cool results. But what I'll talk about mostly today is this bit here. So it's not a stocking bash up, but it's just a few punches. So we wanted to see, was stocking having a benefit or a negative impact on the fishery? So right, so this is the head scratching part for me. This is not me, so I'll give you Dan's email address. You can talk to me about it. So basically we started with what we call a state-space model. So it's basically looking at catch per unit effort, and this is what we'll talk about today, CPUE through time and the changes. So one year is related to the previous year, and then you actually add stocking in there as a factor of, and sort of have a whole bunch of different things. So that's me scratching my head when he tells me and tries to explain it to me. So, and Dan got really excited about this because he goes, it actually works. And he said, this is quite amazing because you can actually see trends in this fishery, and basically what the trends are showing is that the fishery is pretty much in all of these systems, the 13s that we looked at in detail, it's actually increasing across most of them. But it was particularly in the impoundments that really sort of stood out, and you can see that on the graph on the right, that the impoundments, there's a real change in the fishery. So then we went, okay, cool. We wanted to look at, was this stocking that brought about this? So the old counterfactual analysis is what would happen if we did nothing. So we used a thing called, what was it called now? Dan had this explain this to me. So counterfactual analysis to look at just those places that were stocked. And as you can see, if you don't stock the impoundments, obviously you don't end up with any fish. But in the rivers, that stocking was having no effect. So we then went to this next part of the analysis, which was looking at, what was really causing this in the rivers. So this density dependent bottleneck, as we describe it, is talking about rivers don't really need it because they're operating normally, dams need it. So the omniscient manager is borrowed from engineering, and it looks at what would happen if you didn't, if you did or you didn't actually do it, and how do you actually get to the best possible outcome. So the main constraint we had within this model was that we could only stock the number of fish that we put into these 4 impoundments. So that was about 2.5 million fish over that period. So when we ran this model, it actually came out pretty close to what was actually really happening. But what it did do, it actually smoothed it out a lot more. So the actual red line is the omniscient manager actually telling us what it should do and the actual catch rates that you could achieve. So then we went, okay, cool. So what would we do how would it manage the stocking? So the bottom graph there is what we did as Fisheries Agency, and it said, well, what you should have done was this, and that would have got you most optimal outcome. So the same numbers of fish, and it actually shifted some of the fish around, and it came up with this thing, and the really cool thing, it said, don't stock everywhere. You need to be a bit smarter about your stocking and stock in different impoundments. So use the same number of fish, but actually stock better, and you'll get the better outcomes. So an example of this in Glenbourne Lake, as you can see, for some reason we know why it is, because it's a big lake and it's quite an important fishery. They stock the really crap out of it, whereas the omniscient manager says you shouldn't have done that because you're actually having a negative impact on your catch rates. Okay, so we then said to the model, can we constrain this so that we're actually only ending up with the same catch rates? So basically that 153 fish per 100 angler hours that we're catching in these impoundments, we said we want to constrain the model to say to it that we only want you to actually allow that catch rate. What are you going to do, and how many fish should we have stocked to actually achieve those same outcomes? Because if you go back to that one, you can actually see that the catch that he, or as we call it he, but it is, we have to pretend as a guy sitting there with a crystal ball, he actually had greater catch rates by doing his stocking strategy. I know this is a bit confusing, but we'll get to a good point in a minute. So, we said, can you please constrain yourself to just having the same catch rate? And what it came out was that we could have achieved exactly the same result by stocking 13% of the actual fish. So we only really needed to stock 300,000, not 2.4 million, and we would have got the same result with exactly the same catch rate. So you go, well, why did you put the rest in? And this is where I guess we've become trapped as agencies, where we produce all these fish and we've got to do something with them. We put them in, and we say this is really great because these numbers are really important. The minister gets to say that we stock a lot of fish, but it wasn't really necessary. So this is about actually stocking numbers that we should be, or the fish that or the numbers of fish we should be stocking to get the best outcome or the same outcomes. So we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So that's good. So surprisingly, the tournament data. So we've had this 30 years of data that we've actually collected, been sitting around doing nothing, is actually quite useful. And it really got the guys, now we have guys in America doing some stuff for us, because again, this is fantastic because you've got such a great data set. And I'm going, it's only just a bunch of anglers going out, but I think this really reinforces what you can do and how powerful citizen science can be when it's used correctly and you actually look at the data. I suppose that would help too. And we can actually generate useful data or useful outcomes from to inform management about this. And when I say what I mean by that, we can actually use it to be smarter about our stocking, save money, and probably get better outcomes in fisheries like such as Glenbore Dam. The reason why that, there's a lot of fish in there's a lot of stunting going on because we've overstocked it. So that omniscient man said that, and he told us that, and he didn't know that they were stunted in there, but we do because we actually do fisheries independent studies. So what are we going to do in the future? This is preliminary. It's only been 30 years in the making, so we can call it preliminary. So by 2050 we should be done. But what we want to do is we want to optimise what we call the catch per unit effort. So what we're saying is we want to get the best outcomes for the fishermen and the fishery. So we're going to try and get to a point where we say, what do we do now that we can actually get the best results for the minimum amount of stocking and create these boutique fisheries? So the big thing that Dan's really excited about, and we're working with some guys from the States on, is we want to build this basically what he's called a decision support tool. So you'll be able to put in the quantity of water in your impoundment. This is the dream. We've got to see if we can get there or not. The whole bunch of things using that previous data, and then we'll be able to hopefully recommend a stocking number for each of those impoundments for each year within New South Wales. And I did have some pictures. I didn't think I had enough time of really big fish from New South Wales because we do have the best fishery. Thank you.
Let's go for a couple of minutes of questions. Yep, hands straight up.
Gavin, apologise, but can you just take us back to the slide for the omniscient and I just want to ask, so I understand what to me it looks like, is it saying that the omniscient is stocking more frequently but at lower numbers?
Yes, right, yeah.
Because isn't there a potential constraint about that? That's lovely and ideal, but with hatchery production we're relying on when we've got the fish available. So it looks like it's nice to be able to do it more frequently and at lower numbers on consistency, but is that practically possible? And are you going to factor in the fact that when you have those stockings available is one of the big constraints on trying to do that?
100%, and a lot of the time, no, Cam, you can't ask a question. A lot of the time, yes, we are constrained by that, and that's why a lot of the viewers just see big stockings of massive numbers of fish because you produce them that year, and they go, we've got to get rid of them. But it's not a smart thing for the fishery, because what you're actually doing in the long term is probably not doing the right thing by the fishery. You're doing it because you've got to get rid of the fish out of the hatchery rather than the fishery. No, You can ask me later, Ken. And so, yes, that is an ideal scenario, and whether we can achieve that or not is another thing.
So there's no option to hold them longer at the hatchery and just eke them out in spots, but you don't have the capacity in hatcheries generally to do that.
Go on, Ken.
I just really for extension, it's fantastic work there for extension, the size of catch, and that differential between CPUE and size of catch. What do the anglers want? Do they want more 50 centimetre bass? Or do they want to catch a bass every half an hour? And that goes to rapidity as well with the CPUE because there's a huge range. But yeah, size of catch, overlaying that, and the model can pump that out. You can then put it to the anglers. What do you want? You want to catch a bass, a small bass every half an hour, or do you want to catch a big bass twice a day? And I reckon that's a better way to extend that information and put the decision back to them.
We're just giving you guys the tools, that's all.
Wrap it up, come on. Thanks very much for that comment, not a question there, Cam, and thanks, Gav. Again, we'll continue that in a few minutes' time. Next up, we've got Sean Tracey from the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies down in lovely Hobart. So those of you from overseas, it's the kind of overseas part of Australia. And Sean's going to be talking to us about tuna. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, so I'm going to give you a run through of a survey that feels like it was only done yesterday, but it was actually almost, 3-4 years ago now. So it was the National Survey of Recreational Fishing for Southern Bluefin Tuna in Australia. So like all bluefin species around the world, Southern Bluefin had a pretty tumultuous past. It was fished very heavily through the 80s and 90s, down to I think 5 or 8% of its virgin biomass, so it had a really rough trot. In around 1994, they put together a regional fisheries management organisation to try and bring this back. Obviously, highly migratory species, there's many countries that get engaged in this fishery, so they worked together to come together to look at how they could bring that back. So it has some of the most advanced stock assessment modelling and scientists working on that to bring it back. Good news is that they are now on their way back. So I think last assessment they were up around 15, 16, 17%. I can't remember exactly, but it's on the way up, which is great. Now, one of the things with this RFMO is that the countries are now required to account for all sources of mortality. So that's whether it's your discards or your actual catch. And in Australia, Southern Bluefin Tuna is actually a really popular recreational species, and particularly since it's been coming back and becoming more available, we're seeing it in the southern states in particular, so South Australia, Victoria, Tassie, even New South Wales, and to a lesser extent Western Australia. It is actually quite a popular recreational species. One of the problems for us, though, is we don't have an assessment. We manage our recreational fisheries at a state level. So we've got this, as I said, a species that's moving all around the world, all around Australia, and then in Australia we've got the jurisdictions that are trying to work out, or how do we manage this, or how do we even get the data to do it. So we were at the international meeting, a particular country put us on notice. You guys need to be reporting your catch. So we had to come up very quickly in a very short timeline with a method to put together a national estimate for this. So we've heard a lot about surveys at this conference, which is great. I love surveys. But this had to use a whole range of different methods because we wanted it to be probabilistic. It's going to be used for our international obligations, so it has to be robust. So we had to look at certain levels of precision. So we went around and sort of quickly put together what we could find for the best sample frame. So any representative-based survey, you want to have a good sample frame in each of the states that were of interest to be able to do this work. So there had been some state-based surveys in the past. So for example, Victoria had done a great survey several years prior, and they were using boat ramp surveys, so on-site creel surveys. It worked really well in Victoria because at the time there was only a limited number of boat ramps that were being used to access this fishery, so it was a really good method for that. South Australia, so we did some preliminary work and we worked out that probably the best option again was to do that. They don't have a fishing licence frame there, so again we looked at boat ramps in South Australia. So that was our population. So our population basically is the boat ramps, but also time. So if we look at the figure up here, this is sort of going through the year. We have a high season when the fish are really abundant, and then a low season. So we're actually randomly sampling days through that period, and then we're stratifying as well. So we want to have the days that are, you know, some weekends in there, weekdays, and we mix it all up. So we're randomly sampling from that population of days. We then had a large number of creel clerks that would go to the boat ramp on those days and interview all the fishers that were coming back in. So basically we'd get the full coverage of who was fishing on that day. We would pump it through a black box of statistics, and then we'd come up with a regional estimate. So this was for the on-site creel surveys. If we look at the regions, so in South Australia, so we had several regions. Australia is a big country. It has a lot of coastline, and again, this was put together quite quickly. But we had some really good local knowledge. So we got local fishermen, regional managers to give us the information about where is the best place to put our effort to make sure we're capturing all these people. Is there a tiny boat ramp there somewhere that we've missed that there may be a few tuna caught out of? Absolutely. But we've chosen the ones based on the best information at hand to be able to capture the bulk of the fishing activity. So we had 7 sampling regions, 17 boat ramps. We surveyed 754 days. And that's only 356 days in a year, but that's just how many days are actually sampled across all the ramps. We did almost 8,700 interviews, and this is just one of the states. And our response rates, and this is the bit that I like because response rates were massive. 99.7% of people that we interviewed participated and provided their information. So on that one again, so yeah, just due to time, so Victoria was the same, exactly the same design. It actually had less boat ramps because at the time their fishery was very much based on their west coast. And I think there was literally about 4 or 5 major boat ramps that were being used at the time. In Tasmania, we had a different issue. So we now have people fishing everywhere. There's too many boat ramps. Some are good. It depends where the fish are moving to. You know, one week they can be up here and that boat ramp's the one that's being used. The next week they've moved down the coast and a different boat ramp's being used. We don't have a general fishing licence, so we didn't have that sample frame, so we had to think a bit laterally now. So what do you need to catch a tuna? A boat. So we got the vessel registration database. So that's now our sample frame. We know who the boats are or how many boats there are. We could also get rid of, we could trim that down, so personal watercraft, even though there are some crazy people that do fish for these things off personal watercrafts. Yachts, a few other things, we could sort of trim that down to be most likely. Also vessels less than 4.5 metres, because this is an offshore fishery, so we trim that down as well. So our target population is about 15,000 registered recreational vessels. We sampled 2,000 of them, just over 2,000 of them. It gave us 639 eligible vessels, so these were ones that indicated that they were likely to do some kind of bluefin fishing for the year. And then we had 597 of them agreed to do a diary. So they did a diary with us where we would ring them. So when I say diary, it's more of a memory jogger. So they would just note down their details, but we actually had phone interviewers that would ring them to collect all that information. So we're taking that burden off them to, oh, I've got to send in my diary and stuff. We're just helping them out. We're getting, give us the data, we'll jot it all down. So the diary was purely just if they needed to take some notes about how many fish they caught on a day. We would set that frequency of contact depending on how often they were fishing. If they're the kind of person that's fishing every week, we would ring them maybe every 3 weeks. If they only were fishing once a month, we'd tailor it to them. So here then we've got basically a totally different method, and again we've gone the other way. So rather than putting a regional estimates together to get a statewide estimate, we've now got a statewide estimate that we can split up to be a regional estimate. So basically we're still doing the same thing, slightly different method. So again, of people that did the survey, 91% of them completed that full 12 months of reporting their information. So this is, and there's probably a science unto itself. Who do you get to do the interviews? We find that middle-aged women are amazing because they're not going to steal your fishing spots. They're not they're not interested in talking about fishing, so it's efficient for them when they're on the phone. It's not going to turn into a 2-hour conversation about the fishing trip. And they get really good response rates. It's, I don't know if it's talking to your mother. They're like, everyone likes to talk to that age group, and we have really good response rates with those people. New South Wales, different again. So now we're dealing with a really large population of people. Again, large coastline, lots of boat ramps, lots of potential access points, fish moving all up and down the coast. Now they do have a licence there, so a general recreational fishing licence. So we, and there's a lot, there's like 433,000 of them. So again, we now used a large call centre to call 16,000 of these licence holders, again randomly sampled and stratified by region. We did upweight to the coast, because obviously it's more likely that people are going to fish if they're living on the coast, particularly offshore. And we found 528 game fishers in that group, so there's a lot of other game fish species, marlins, and 142 of those were SBT fishers. So this was really finding a needle in a haystack in quite a large state. So again, we come up with a statewide estimate. I'm not going into all the stats in any detail, but if you'd like to talk stats later, we can if we must. Charter boats. So we also have a charter fishery in all these states. So now we've got to deal with the charter boat sector. So what have we got? South Australia and New South Wales, they both have mandatory charter boat logbooks. So we were able to get that information from the charter boats, from the governments in those states. South Australia, they had 57 licensed operators, and this is all their charter operators, of which 29 reported SBT fishing. So there's plenty of SBT fishing going on in South Australia from their charter industry. New South Wales was actually zero. In the year we did the survey, there was no one doing SBT charters. There were some that were game fishing. Tassie and Victoria don't have mandatory logbooks, so we actually had to set up a voluntary one for that year, and we incentivised it. We gave them fuel vouchers to do it, and again, we got very good response rates with that. The next thing is turning all these numbers into weight, because again, this is going back to that international committee to decide who gets what and who's taking what. So we were getting, our krill clerks were also taking the size information, and you can see sort of, this is kind of basically west coming round east and then up the, west coming south and then up the east coast. The interesting thing to note here, you've got two sort of cohorts, lots of school fish, so smaller fish, but then you do have this bimodality where these big fish come into the picture as well. So we're going, how do we assess that? So we then had to split those big fish out and do a numbers expansion on them and then convert them to a weight, and then the school fish. So there was a lot of stats, and that's why I don't have the time to go into it today. But again, really interesting stuff about converting all this survey data into actual numbers. So what does it give us? Here's just a snapshot for South Australia, looking at effort. So we can see all our different regions there, but it's giving us information about the the amount of effort. So we've got 11% of all the fishing trips that were occurring in South Australia were targeting tuna. There was 4,000 odd days of fishing. 44% of these were where tuna trips were catching SBT. We can see what kind of release rates were happening in each state and in each region. So some really detailed information. Same with catch, which regions were having the greatest catch. Again, so release rates was on this one. What's been caught in the high and low seasons as well, so getting some really detailed information. But keep in mind, as we're going forward, we're just adding up these large numbers up the top here. So if we look across states, in this particular year, and again, you've got to keep in mind this is a highly migratory species, so things change. South Australia came on top. The VFA were not happy about this at all. But it may be different. It may be different in another year. But some really interesting information again here now, so we can break down private votes versus charter boats and look at their release rates versus each other. That can be a really interesting thing. Is there more of a catch and release ethic in the private boats, but whereas charter boats are looking at harvesting more for clients. So it's a national breakdown. So we basically add all this together. We also had Western Australia. So we didn't actually do Western Australia. It timed out really well that they do a really good probability-based, boat-based survey on their recreational fishery. So we could take their estimate and put that into the mix. So after all that, a big job, I think it was 60 people, a lot of money. We came up with one number, 270 tonne, plus or minus about 6%. And that's gone off now, and we've managed our international obligation of providing an estimate from the recreational fishery. The important things to note here is that, you know, if you look down the bottom, the global TAC is 17,000 tonne. Australia gets about 6,000 of that, or 35%. So the rec harvest was estimated at about 4.4% of Australia's allocation. And what this has led to for the first time is now a set aside for a Commonwealth fishery for a recreational fishery, for a Commonwealth managed fishery. The recreational sector has a set aside allocation of 5% of Australia's quota. So as this stock rebuilds, that the amount of tonnage available to the recreational sector will increase. Where to from here? At this point, there's no plans to do it again because we've put a buffer in around that number. But as I said, highly migratory species, since we did this survey, things have changed a lot. You know, anyone that knows anything about this fishery, they are showing up in Bass Strait in areas that we wouldn't have seen them before, and we would have to do a totally different design again. So highly dynamic, really interesting project, and a really interesting outcome directly to management.
Rightio, so disappointed there's only one picture of a tuna in that talk there, Sean. You'll have to work on that one, but that's okay. Our last talk in the session is Keno Ferter. We're keeping up our international flavour. So Norway is sometimes known as the Tasmania of the North, I think. And we're hearing about novel methods to estimate recreational catch and effort. Over to you.
Thank you. So actually, I'm combining many of the presentations which were given just now. It's impressive to see like what is done in other countries and what kind of challenges we are still dealing with. So I'm presenting two different methods we've used to estimate catches and effort in Norway in different study areas. So just to give you an idea, so this figure we've shown another time today. So this is a paper by Hyde et al., where we summarized the recreational participation rates in Europe, catches, effort, and several other things. And actually, Norway has the highest participation rate in marine recreational fishing in Europe, but also is probably also close to the world's highest participation. So 33% of the Norwegian population, they fish at least once a year. So yeah, fishing is just very popular. So it's surprising, and believe me or not, there's no national survey on recreational fishing in Norway. And actually 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I started, there wasn't even a recreational fishing survey at all in Norway. So this is just something which had started to happen the last decade, to actually look into catches and effort by recreational fishers along the coast. So we have lots of challenges. Maybe that's the reason why there hasn't been any research on this, because people just didn't want to touch it. So when you stretch out Norway's coastline, it's actually the second longest coastline in the world after Canada. We saw this this morning. Canada has the longest coastline, but Norway has actually the second longest coastline, and that's because the coast of Norway, you have many of these fjords going long, like Hardanger Fjord and Sognefjord, which go 250 kilometers inland. And when you stretch these out, including the islands, it's just it's amazing, really, really long. And there's no license, so you don't know who is fishing. Anyone can fish in Norway. That also maybe explains the high participation rate. It's really easily accessible for everyone. Children can fish, anyone can fish. And in addition, so you have the locals, the residents, but you also have this really large tourist fishery. So people are coming from all over Europe. Actually, it's now becoming a global fishing population. So you find from everywhere in the world, actually, especially in northern Norway, because it's really great fishing. Now tuna is coming back to Norway. There's a tuna fishery developing now, so soon there will be charter fishery. So it's growing more and more, the tourist fishery, and that also brings challenges in when you want to conduct telephone surveys, which have been presented today. You don't reach the tourists, and tourists take about half of the catches and stand for half of the effort. So it's not just some tourists coming. It's like, 50% of the effort is by tourists. And so you can't just do a telephone survey because you would miss whole this sector. And you don't have a sampling frame because there's no license, so you can't just call to people. The only thing which we got recently is a fishing camp register. So we have around 1,500 camps along the coast. But it's something which was put into action by political pressure because they wanted to know more about tourists. But then I went into this list, I found yoga studio and like all these strange fishing camps, which I then called as a researcher, and they didn't know how they ended up on this list. Was that me? Maybe. I didn't. Yeah, you can still see the slides. So we were faced with this challenge, and that's why we got a big, huge project. And you might recognize some of these people. Jeremy Lai from Tasmania, and people from New Zealand, like from all over the world. We collected this group of researchers, both national partners and international partners, to discuss how can we map recreational fishing in Norway? How can we get some data on the table? And we came up with some methods, and those methods, I'm a part of those. I will present now. So we had this large-scale study where we had a rowing creel survey in 2 study areas. So we chose northern Norway as one area, which is, like as I said, it's probably one of the best fishing destinations in the world. Like lots of fish, like you catch on every cast, and then you have Western Norway, which is far easier to access, but also different in terms of catches. You need to work much harder for your fish. And then we divided those into smaller areas, and then again, those areas were then divided into small 4 square kilometer large polygons. And the reason why we did this is that, I mean, there's no way that you can just drive around the coast to sample the coast. There are no access points, I forgot to mention this. So there's no boat ramps, nothing. People just fish from their gardens. Fishing can happen anywhere. They have boats, like I have my boat on a buoy just outside my house, and others, like, there's no harbor, or there are harbors, but they're also, like, most of the boats are not in harbors. So just driving around, like, in the open ocean to interview anglers, that doesn't make sense because you can't scale up. So we had to come up with this probabilistic survey design where we had divided the coast into all these small areas, and then we picked randomly these polygons, and we surveyed those in the field. So we had 40 field days per region within 1 year, and then we were just searching those areas, and then we interviewed active anglers, and we also took biological samples, and then we got their contact information, and by the end of the day we'd call them up, and then we would get a complete trip. So we would get complete trips of those people fishing in those areas, and then a 5-day trip would look like this. So we had all these areas which were selected, and then we drove with a boat. And this looks small, but those were actually 1,800 kilometers in 5 days. So it's a lot of driving with a boat, and but then this is the only way to access those anglers. And then some estimates. So to the left, that's the southern region, and then to the right, that's the northern region. And I'm just going to focus on cod here, which is the main, one of the main species being caught. And on the other hand, it's also one of the main species of concern because cod populations, the Atlantic cod, have crashed. And when you look at the numbers, you're talking about 1 million cod landed in northern Norway. And when you convert this into weight, you're actually talking about like 2,000 tons. And what was the estimate? 270 tons for Southern Bluefin Tuna in all Australia, That's 10 times more just caught. So catches are really large. And what the management has done, they also introduced this buffer in assessment where they set apart 7,000 tons for half of Norway, but when we already find 2,000 tons in one region, so this number is just it's just too little. Like this buffer doesn't work. So now we really need to get numbers for the whole country. When you look at this number here, that's caught in the south, 73 tons. It looks small, but when you look at the commercial landings, they are just around 30 tons. So recreational fishing is at least as large, but probably double as high, the landings of, like, compared to commercial fishing. So recreational fishing needs to be accounted for. When you look at nationalities, so these are tourists, ignore the green one, just they are the same anyway. So, but just looking at the distribution of nationalities, when you look at the south, they are dominated by German anglers. But then again, when you look at northern Norway, like you have people from pretty much everywhere, at least in Europe and some overseas. But it's because it's really far. It's like, yeah, you said, it's like Tasmania, not as easy to reach, but if you get there, it's really great. So there's a big difference in terms of nationality between those two regions. And then we did a small-scale study, and I really liked your talk because I think like methods like machine learning and deep learning we can use also in this case. But we are just as a start there because we wanted to try camera monitoring in a smaller study area. So that's just a very compared to what I just showed in the other study. It's a really small dot on the map where we chose one fjord inside a larger town in Norway. And the special part about this fjord is it's a cod spawning area. So cod are coming in spring to spawn there, and then they are leaving again. And since I said cod are struggling a lot, populations have trashed, they decided to close that area for commercial fishing. There was a lot of gillnet fishing going on, and then they just closed the fishery. And what happened, because there was no recreational fishing in this area, because no one could fish because of all the gill nets, they got just stuck in the gill nets. The recreational fishing exploded because suddenly this area was accessible for recreational fishermen because there were no nets any longer, they didn't get stuck, so they could just fish. And so management was like, okay, now we have this new sector of fishing on this Scott spawning area. So we installed cameras monitoring the whole fjord system. So we have 100% coverage with cameras there. And when you come on a day, it looks similar to the picture Marco showed. Start of the season, and it's for 2 months the season. It's covered in boats, and they are all fishing on these spawning cod. And it's really dense. Like it's dangerous to drive a boat. I have seen like how charter boats have run over smaller vessels there, just because it's just a mass of boats moving around. And that's where we were interviewing one of the boats. And we had several situations where other boats just crashed into our boat because they were looking into the echo sounder, finding cod, and then, yeah. And these are the catches. So this is just the catch from one boat. And we, as I said, we take biological samples and calculate the numbers. And in addition, we do this camera counting. So we have a camera, like those 3 cameras. This is one example. So this camera looks over the fjord. We do manual counts at the moment. So we don't, because we haven't done this. We need the local knowledge first to see who's actually fishing and who's not fishing, because it's a harbour area, it's an urban area. So, but you see we have radar in addition. So all boats are detected by radar. So when it's foggy or dark, we can also detect boats for radar. And these are the counts. So in the start of the season, we are talking about like 30 boats a day fishing on the spawning stock. And then during the season, the effort drops down. And when you actually combine numbers, catch per unit effort, from the field with camera counts, we end up with a preliminary estimate of 5,000 cod harvested. And that's in an area where they actually wanted to close. These numbers, they haven't been presented to anyone yet. I think they will cause some interest when we publish them in Norway. So we are running the survey one more time this year to actually get like more sure into the numbers, and then we'll see how what we end up with. So just to conclude, we had this polygon-based rowing tree survey to map on a larger scale, which worked really well. On a local scale, camera is probably the way to go, and in addition with deep learning, this can be really nice to have automated monitoring. And yeah, as I said, we have found that the boat-based catches, they are substantial, and especially compared to commercial fisheries, some areas they are exceeding commercial catches. And that's why they definitely should be included in stock assessments. So thank you very much. I'm contributing to the depletion of mackerel with my son, but
Fantastic. I'd like to now welcome our 5 excellent speakers up to the front for a bit of a question and answer session. We've got 15 minutes. Really high caliber talk, so please grab a chair. And any questions out there for our speakers this morning? I'll start with you, Sean. I've got one for you. So you had to do this pretty quickly. I'm not questioning the numbers, but what would you do differently? What did you learn about this approach that if you had your time over, that you do something slightly different in the way that the methodology was rolled out, or was it perfect?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was perfect. We had done things, as I said, in various states that we could draw on. The methodology was all well and truly, validated and referenced. So we felt that the methods we were using were fine. If we had our time and stuff, some of the things that we've seen today here, the machine learning and the effort for boats and stuff would be amazing to wind into it. But I think we just stuck with the tried and true, because it was get the job done quick and get it done well. It's not everyone's
It's a prop.
Yeah, mate, to say all that again.
Yes. All right. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Sean, Dave O'Gorman and I steered and his 4.2 meter hunter, we steered a bluefin down at Kendra. That was like 270.1, I think, estimate.
Sorry, we missed that one.
1.5, right?
No, there was some other silly bugger that was swimming down there as well, and he represented you, so it's all good.
Question on the bass information. Having come from New South Wales and now in Queensland, obviously I've observed the difference in the types of fisheries we've got in Queensland for the size of the bass there, and I know that you've got more bony bream and more conditions that influences on that growth of the bass. But why would we have fisheries like Somerset and say Wivenhoe that are consistently like they are trophy bass fisheries and not just some you can go and catch these fish in the winter months when they're schooled up, as opposed to I haven't seen a fishery other than Glenmore a long time ago that would have competed with that.
Yeah, there's probably a whole bunch of reasons. Yeah, probably temperature is one of the big things. You guys do have a lot more smaller species, or Queensland seems to have a lot more smaller species, but there is some discussion in our fisheries agency about actually, rather than just stocking the trophy fish all the time, maybe we need to stock some of the trash fish so they've got something to eat. And I think a lot of the time we are doing, as you can see by some of the numbers on those graphs there, we are overstocking so we're unbalanced as well. And we're trying to get to a point where we can actually create trophy fisheries, and probably, and I guess that was the thing that or what I was trying to get to in the end, was that maybe we don't need to stock as many, that it may be time to, step back a bit and let them actually grow a bit.
Yeah, Brogo was really interesting. I used to fish Brogo shopping area, and they were always hard to get anything over 30, like ever. It just, they couldn't work out why it was like that.
Yeah. I'll let you work it out. I won't say
Yeah,
anything. There's some other managers in the room.
I have a question for Africa, where we have no monitoring and no understanding of what's going on in our recreational fishery, I'm especially interested in your work and using social media and YouTube to try and understand what's going on. But I suppose my question is there something especially suitable about YouTube as opposed to the other social medias? Is there less of a legal hurdle to using what's in the YouTube space as opposed to what's on Facebook groups, for example? Because I think I recall from your presentation that you had about less than 25% representation on YouTube, I think. I can't remember the exact number. And I wonder if one of the other social medias has got more representation, but perhaps other legal hurdles?
The penetration on YouTube is even less.
Okay.
So it's not very representative of the entire population, but I think if you don't have data, as we did in Italy, now there are some ongoing monitoring programs in Italy, it's nice to have an overview of what is going on. Sure. In particular, what we did is comparing the two groups within the same social media.
Yes, okay.
That was our interest in. From an absolute point of view, I think you can get a decent, still not calibrated view of what is going on. And the issue with Facebook is that Facebook, after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, closed the API.
Okay.
So officially, you cannot use the API. You can scrap some data with other machine learning or whatever issues, but let's say it's illegal.
Yes.
And then in the group of Facebook, usually you don't have the permission to do that. So you should ask the permission to the administrator of the group, and then you can scrap the data. The nice thing of YouTube is that it's quite liberal towards researchers. So you have an API key code for a researcher, and then you can download several data that are easily accessible. That's the main issue.
Thank you.
Got a question for you, Keno. So 33% of people in Norway are recreational fishing, massive catches relative to commercial. What's that dynamic like between the recreational and commercial fishers in there? Are they living in harmony, or are there some challenges in certain spots?
I would say the residents and the commercials, they are fine. They're not in that area which I showed in the end, because I mean the commercials, they got pushed out, and now the recreational are coming in. So there's a lot of conflict, of course. But in general, I would say, since everyone is kind of a recreational fisherman, or has someone in the family, there's not that much conflict, but there's a lot of conflict between tourists and commercials. Because they feel that the tourist industry is taking over their traditional fishing spots, and they are harvesting so much fish and fishing so much that they can't really use their traditional spots any longer. So there's lots of conflicts, and yeah, this is something to deal with. So, yeah.
It's interesting that you close down the fishery to the commercial sector. You identified a spawning concentration of a fish that's in trouble, and yet you allow then the recs to come in who are questionably taking more than the commercial take anyway.
So actually, when we compare catch, it looks like there's more caught now than before. So when we compare catch numbers, so I mean this is why we're doing this research now. Because I think management just didn't expect that they would open up a completely new possibility for accessing this point, because before there was no recreational fishing there.
I've got another one for Keno. You did have, the cod data was interesting, but you've also got, I think, the world's largest salmon farming situation there in Norway. And you had other species. Were there any other interesting data that you collected for other species? And is there conflict between, say, the salmon farmers and the recreationals? Or do the recreationals go in and actually, say, target escapees? What's that sort of dynamic for the other species?
In terms of, so there's no direct fishing for escapees. It's not like in Tasmania, for example, where this is a popular fishery. It's more like people are complaining that you have this mix of wild population with, it's not beneficial for the recreationals. But what is done is that those cages, aquaculture, they attract coal fish, for example, they can attract other fish. So especially tourist fishers, they go to these cages. And they actually had to make a zone, a no fishing zone around those cages, because people got stuck in the nets, ripped open the nets. So now, but many tourists, because they just want to catch as much as they can. So it's much easier to go to a cage and fish in the surroundings of the cage than just find your fish on your own. So yeah, that's one thing we observe. And otherwise, we see that mackerel, for example, is luckily one species which takes the pressure from other species. I didn't go into detail, but mackerel is actually the highest number in numbers in the south, and that relieves a bit from the other species because it's really easy to catch. He caught it by himself, and he is as happy to catch a mackerel as catching a cod. So yeah, we are fishing for mackerel because it's healthier to eat and it's fun to catch, and yeah, very healthy stock situation as well. Yeah.
Rod, so we just need to get everyone to eat mackerel and not flathead in Australia, and we've sorted out all our problems.
Start early, and brainwash.
You can overfish them too. They are in the United States right now.
I've got one for Sean. I missed half your speech, which was really annoying. But I heard at the end of it, you're not planning on running the survey anytime soon. Obviously, financially, it's quite an endeavour, as I have seen. But given the fact that, I guess anecdotally, since the survey concluded, the tuna fisheries changed in such a way as it's tended to move south, tended to move further east by the looks of it all. And over the last few years, there's been significant catches of large barrel fish more readily. Is that something that you're thinking about? Is that something that might affect our fishery, the tuna fishery as it stands, just from what's happened over the last sort of 3 years?
It's a really good question. There's a lot of ebb and flow, so there was a buffer put on that percentage, and obviously, as I said, I think the latest assessment is put the quota up again, so that tonnage has now gone up. So there is a buffer being built in, and it increases. So there was a bit of a design there, unless things went absolutely gangbusters, and we would go, I think we're going to be well over our buffer, then we may need to reassess it. But as you said, it's moved further east, yes, closer to Melbourne, which is a big thing. But the catches off Portland and where the fishery traditionally was have dropped off a lot. Like you live over that way, you know that it used to be hundreds of boats coming through, and now it's mainly locals. Tassie, we've had an interesting thing as well, where it's shifted to the north coast and not so much in the traditional areas. So. At this point, it doesn't look like there's massive shifts in the overall catch. It's just the catches are happening in different places.
Mark, I've got a question for you. So, I mean, in telemetry-based tracking studies, you can sort of infer what the fish is doing based on some sort of characterisation of its movement pattern, for example, and so use a state-space model to do that. Is there any scope to do something similar with boat data, where you can actually start to try and classify what these fishes are doing? Because obviously, if a boat's underway, it's got a nice weight behind it, and so it's not fishing. What are you going to do there? And actually, because you sort of touched on getting some angler behaviour and actually what the boat's doing, is that part of your PhD work, or where do you see that going?
It will be part of my PhD to analyze trajectories of both acoustic telemetry with fish and also with trajectory of the boats. I think it's one of the most important parts to quantify the recreational effort is to working on trajectories. For example, in our case, it's not so difficult because the traditional way of fishing, the pearly razor fish in Mallorca, is to angling it on a boat without, of course, throw the anchor. So you see in the data that the fishing boats drift all together following the waves, while other boats that are there just for chilling is a place full of tourism, so they're not drifting all together. So in this way, in our case, it's pretty easy to distinguish which boats are fishing and which are not. Sailing boats, cruising boats are not fishing. So this is, in our case, the easiest way to counting fishing boats. Other cases, I don't know, that depends on the type of the fleet, of the recreational fleet, and it depends on that marine traffic. Maybe not so easy. That's why we need knowledge about the spot, we need knowledge about what is happening there, and this case really case specific. But yes, after having finished to develop the model, I will dedicate part of my PhD to analyzing trajectories, of course using deep learning.
Okay, it's 12 o'clock, which is lunchtime. Please join me in thanking our 5 speakers. Fantastic sessions, some great questions. Thanks, guys.